Welcome to our video on supply and demand. By watching this video, we hope you will gain a basic understanding of supply and demand theories and how these two important concepts influence how markets work. Before we talk about supply and demand, we must first introduce the ideas of markets and competition. A market is a group of buyers and sellers of a specific good. Buyers determine demand for the good, and sellers determine the supply of the good. Markets have varying degrees of organization. Some markets are highly organized, like auctions, while others are less organized. In a less organized market, sellers determine the price to sell goods at, and buyers choose how much of these goods to buy. In this video, we will be focusing on competitive markets. In a competitive market, there are so many buyers and sellers that each has a negligible impact on the market price of the good. In addition, we are also assuming perfect competition in which all goods offered for sale are exactly the same, and buyers and sellers are called price takers because there are so many of them that no one buyer or seller has influence over market prices. Now it's time to talk about supply and demand. As you can see, Packers fans aren't shy when it comes to showing support for their team. We will be using the example of the market for Packers jerseys to help understand supply and demand concepts in the first section of the video. Let's begin by explaining some basic demand concepts. The quantity demanded of a good is the amount of a good that buyers are willing to purchase. Price determines the amount of a good demanded. When all other factors are held constant, if the price of a good rises, then the quantity of a good demanded will decrease. Also, if the price of a good falls, the quantity of that good demanded will increase. This idea is called the law of demand. A demand schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity of that good demanded. For example, if the price of Packers jerseys increases, the quantity of jerseys demanded by Mike will decrease. A demand curve is a graphical representation of the demand schedule that also shows the relationship between the price of an item and the quantity demanded of that item. The blue line on the graph is the demand curve showing Mike's demand for Packer jerseys. So far, we have seen an individual's demand for a good, but what happens if we want to analyze the demands for all individuals in a market? To do this, we will use market demand. Market demand is the sum of all individual demand curves for a product. For example, if the market for Packer jerseys consists of two buyers, Mike and Ted, and the price of one jersey is $30, in order to find the total quantity of jerseys demanded in the market when the price per jersey is $30, we will add the quantity of jerseys demanded by Mike, which is 7, to the quantity of jerseys demanded by Ted, which is 11, to come up with the quantity of jerseys demanded in the market, which is 18. When graphing the quantity demanded in the market, simply add the quantities demanded by all individuals in the market at each given price. This will result in a market demand curve that is shifted to the right. If something happens that changes the quantity demanded of a good at any price, the result will be a shift in the demand curve. There are two possible ways the demand curve can shift. First, changes that increase the quantity of a good demanded at any price result in the shift of the demand curve to the right. Second, changes that decrease the quantity of a good demanded at any price will result in the shift of the demand curve to the left. There are many factors which can lead to shifts in the demand curve. The first factor that can shift the demand curve is income. If your income falls, you are less likely to spend money on certain goods. Using our example of Packer jerseys, if income falls, people are less likely to purchase new jerseys, causing a shift of the demand curve to the left. In this case, Packer jerseys are called normal goods because as their income goes down, so does the demand for jerseys and vice versa. If demand for a good increases when income falls, the good is considered an inferior good. An example showing inferior goods can be found in the market for used cars. As someone's income decreases, they are more likely to buy a less expensive used car than a new car, which shifts the demand curve for used cars to the right. Another factor causing shifts in a good's demand curve is the price of related goods. If a fall in the price of one good reduces demand for another good, the two goods are considered substitutes. For example, as the price of Packers sweatshirts, a substitute for jerseys, increases, the demand for jerseys increases as well. However, if a fall in the price of one good raises demand for another good, the two goods are known as complements. In our example, if the price of Packer tickets falls, the demand for jerseys increases, the two goods are complements. Tastes are an additional factor that can shift demand curves for a good. When people like something, they are more likely to buy that item, which increases demand for the good and shifts the demand curve to the right. If the Packers have a successful season, more people will be interested in them and want to buy jerseys, thus increasing demand. Expectations about the future are yet another factor that could result in the demand curve shift. If someone expects to receive a pay raise, that person is less likely to save money and therefore more willing to spend money now. Applying this to our example of Packer jerseys, if people expect pay increases, they are more willing to buy jerseys at the current prices, which increase demand and shift the curve to the right. The last factor that causes a shift in the demand curve for a good is the number of buyers in a market. As we previously saw when looking at market demand, as the number of buyers in a market increases, the demand for a good also increases. For example, if all Bears fans realized the errors in their ways and converted to being Packers fans, there would be more buyers in the market for Packers jerseys, increasing market demand. Before we move on to supply concepts, it is important to note the difference between a movement along the demand curve and a shift in the demand curve. Using our example, when there is a change in the price of Packer jerseys themselves, but all other factors are held constant, there is a movement along the demand curve that represents a change in the quantity of jerseys demanded. On the other hand, when one of these variables change, the demand curve will shift either to the left or the right to reflect changes in demand for the good. Now that we've learned about demand principles, it's time to move on to supply and look at the actions of sellers in the market. The quantity supplied of an item is the amount of it sellers are willing and able to sell. Again, price is the main determinant of the quantity of goods supplied. All other factors held constant, if the price of a good is high, selling the good is profitable and the quantity supplied is large. If the price of a good is low, selling that good is less profitable and the quantity supplied is small. This idea is known as the law of supply. Similar to a demand schedule, a supply schedule is a chart showing the relationship between the price of a good and the quantity of the good supplied. This table is the supply schedule for the Packers Pro Shop, a seller of Packers jerseys. Another way to look at the relationship between price and quantity supplied of Packers jerseys is to examine a supply curve such as this one. As you can see by the curve, as the price of one jersey increases, so does the quantity supplied by the Packers Pro Shop store. Market supply is the same idea as market demand, only it represents the sum of individual supply curves at a given price. For example, assume the Packer Pro Shop and NFL.com are the only sellers of Packer jerseys in a market. If the Pro Shop's quantity supplied at $30 is $600 and NFL.com's quantity supplied at $30 is $2,000, the market supply of jerseys is $2,600 when the price is $30. Similar to market demand, when graphing the quantity of jerseys supplied in the market, simply add the quantities supplied by every individual seller in the market at each given price. The graphs on the screen show the market supply when the quantities supplied of both jersey sellers are added together at each price. Again, mirroring demand principles, when a change raises quantity supplied at every price, the supply curve shifts to the right, and when a change reduces quantity supplied at every price, the supply curve shifts to the left. There are many variables that cause these shifts in the supply curve. The first factor that results in a shift of the supply curve is input prices. When the price of an input good rises, producing that item generates less profit for the firm, and the firm will respond by producing less of the item. For example, if the cost of fabric increases, Packer jerseys will become more expensive to produce, and supply will decrease. When the price of an input good falls, the firm will receive more profit for each item sold, and it will therefore supply more of the good. For example, if the cost of fabric decreases, Packer jerseys will be less expensive to make, and the Pro Shop will supply more of them, increasing supply. Another factor that results in a shift of the supply curve is technology. As new technology becomes available to produce a good, firms are able to supply more of that good. In our example, if a faster way to produce Packer jerseys was invented, supply would increase and there would be more jerseys available for sale. Expectations about the future affect suppliers as well as buyers. In our example, if it is currently March and the Packer Pro Shop expects jersey prices to increase in August when football season starts, They may hold more jerseys in storage and sell fewer now. This decreases the current supply of jerseys and shifts the supply curve to the left. Lastly, the number of sellers in a market determines the supply of a good in that market. If a large seller of jerseys such as the Packers Pro Shop left the market, there would be fewer jerseys supplied in the market, which would shift the supply curve to the left. It is again important to note the difference between a movement along and a shift in the supply curve. A movement along the supply curve is the result of a change in the price of a good, such as an increase in price of Packer jerseys. This is different than a shift in the supply curve, which is caused by one of the other factors previously mentioned.
Now that we have broken apart supply and demand separately, we can look at them together and how they affect the price and quantity of goods. The equilibrium is the point of intersection between the supply and demand curves. This point determines the equilibrium price, or the price that balances what buyers are willing and able to pay, and sellers are willing and able to sell. Also referred to as the market clearing price, because buyers have bought all they want to buy and sellers have sold all they want to sell. This point also determines the equilibrium quantity, or the quantity supplied and demanded at the equilibrium price. According to the law of supply and demand, the actions of buyers and sellers will eventually bring the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded to the equilibrium point. This can be seen by looking at what is called a surplus. This is when the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Let's say that the quantity supplied is 12 units. This would cause the price to be $30. At this price, the quantity demanded would only be 4 units. Therefore, the quantity supplied, 12 units, would exceed the quantity demanded at 4 units. This would cause an excess supply. In order for suppliers to fix this, they would have to cut prices. This would increase the quantity demanded and decrease the quantity supplied. This would continue to happen until it reaches the equilibrium point. Now suppose the price falls too much and is down to $10. This would cause suppliers to sell only 4 units. At this price, however, the quantity demanded is 12 units, which causes an excess demand. The response to this would be for suppliers to increase the price. This would cause the quantity demanded to decrease and quantity supplied to rise. This would continue to happen until the price reaches the equilibrium. If it overshoots the equilibrium price again, it would restart the process over. So what causes a change in the equilibrium? You previously learned about some events that can cause shifts in one or both of the curves. This shifts the equilibrium to change, resulting in change in price and quantity. There are 3 steps used to analyze how an event affects the equilibrium. First, determine which of the curves the event affects: supply, demand, both, or neither. Second, determine which direction the curve will shift, either left, a decrease, or right, an increase. And third, analyze the diagram to determine how the shift affects the equilibrium. Let's look at an example. Suppose we are looking at a supply and demand schedule for moon shoes. Currently, the equilibrium price is $20, and the equilibrium quantity is 8 units. This commercial is then aired. Now, using the 3 steps, we can determine how this event can cause the equilibrium to change. First, which curve does it affect? It would affect the demand curve, because after airing this commercial, it increased awareness of the product and thus increased the number of buyers. Second, which direction does the curve shift? Because it has increased the number of buyers, it would increase the demand curve, thus shifting it to the right. And third, how does this affect the equilibrium? The increase in demand will cause the quantity of demanded to increase. Therefore, the new equilibrium would be at 11 units, with an equilibrium price of about $27. The previous example showed a shift in the demand curve rising the price. When the price rises, it increases the quantity that is supplied, but it does not cause a change in supply. A shift is caused by something that directly affects the curve. In the example of the commercial directly affects the number of buyers and therefore would cause a shift in demand curve. This would be called a change in demand. However, it does not directly affect the supplier, so it would not cause a shift in supply curve, but change the quantity supplied from 8 units to 11 units. This is called a change in the quantity supplied. To better understand this concept, let's look at another example. Suppose a new space alien movie is going to be aired. How would this affect the equilibrium for moon shoes? First, we must determine which curve it affects. This would affect the supply curve because it would change the expectation of suppliers. Second, which way would the curve shift? It would go right, meaning it would increase the supply because the movie would cause suppliers to believe that customers would buy more moon shoes after the movie is aired. And third, how does this affect the equilibrium? This would cause an increase in supply, creating a surplus. It would change the quantity demanded to a lower amount. To solve this, suppliers would have to cut prices to $10 to sell 12 units. Now suppose a commercial is aired for the space alien movie and it has people wearing moon shoes. What would this do to the equilibrium? First, we must determine which curve it affects. This will affect the supply curve because it would change the expectation of suppliers, and the demand curve because it increases the number of buyers. Second, which way would the curves shift? The supply curve will go to the right, meaning it would increase, because the commercial would cause suppliers to believe more customers would buy moon shoes after the movie is aired. The demand curve will shift to the right because it increases the number of buyers. Third, how does this affect the equilibrium? In this example specifically, because this is a small shift in the demand curve but a larger shift in the supply curve, the new equilibrium would cause the quantity to increase to 13 units and the price to increase to $15 to rebalance the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded.